With tech giants like OpenAI, Google, Meta, and more, for years, the US has been the undisputed leader in artificial intelligence. But that all changed in January when a relatively unknown AI research lab from China released an open-source model that's quickly become the talk of the town in Silicon Valley and the top-rated free app available on Apple's App Store in the US. DeepSeek's technological feat has taken the world by surprise. DeepSeek R1 is an advanced reasoning model that claims to surpass existing benchmarks on several critical tasks. It uses large-scale reinforcement learning for training and directly competes with OpenAI's O1 model. What is interesting about DeepSeek is the low cost associated with building the model as compared to the cost needed to build Meta and other models. The startup claims that it created its low-cost model in just 2 months with less than $6 million. That is in huge contrast to the $100 million that OpenAI spent to train its GPT-4 model. By revamping the foundational structure of AI models and using limited resources more efficiently, DeepSeek is a force to reckon with. DeepSeek's success comes at a time of a tech Cold War between the US and China. US export controls restricted China from accessing the most advanced NVIDIA AI chips. As a result, most Chinese companies have focused on downstream applications rather than building their own models. Now, DeepSeek potentially casts doubt on the dominance of the US in the artificial intelligence space and the validity of high valuations for companies like NVIDIA.
Together, these world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure in the United States and very, very quickly, moving very rapidly, creating over 100,000 American jobs almost immediately.
On the second day of his presidency, Donald Trump announced the Stargate project, a $500 billion initiative that brings together tech titans OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. The rushed announcement indicated a desperation for the US to maintain its top position.
What we want to do is we want to keep it in this country. China is a competitor and others are competitors. We want it to be in this country, and we're making it available. I'm going to help a lot through emergency declarations, because we have an emergency. We have to get this stuff built. So they have to produce a lot of electricity, and we'll make it possible for them to get that production done very easily at their own plants if they want, where they'll build at the plant, the AI plant, they'll build energy generation, and that will be incredible.
The narrative of America's AI leadership being invincible has been shattered, and DeepSeek is proving that AI innovation is not just about funding or having access to the best infrastructure. Now, it's up to the US to adapt and innovate faster if it wants to maintain its leadership in the AI.
You go back a week ago and you think about that picture of the tech bros next to the president and then them announcing $500 billion for Stargate, this big project for AI, and it just looked like American tech supremacy was set for decades.
But that US dominance only lasted for 4 days because a new Chinese AI model is taking the world by storm and causing chaos on the financial markets as a result. We'll talk about that on this episode of Newscast, the BBC's daily news podcast. But first, we're going to dive into the quite unexpected bromance between Donald Trump and the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I'll be joined by two of the BBC's top experts on AI to talk about the Chinese artificial intelligence model, which has basically sent financial markets into a bit of a meltdown, especially for the stock prices of some big tech companies. So there's lots to unpick there. It's absolutely fascinating and a very kind of now story. Another very now story is how Trump's second term as president is shaping up. And it's shaping up to be one where he's on quite good terms with somebody who's from a completely different political ideological persuasion from him, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the UK. First of all, we had these very warm words from the president on Air Force One when one of our colleagues asked him about Keir Starmer. He said that they got on pretty well, even though they didn't see the world in the same way politically. And then we had a 45-minute phone call on Sunday between the two men themselves, followed by a quite effusive readout, as it's known, from Downing Street about the contents of the phone call. So let's get our two best London and Washington whisperers on the line. In Westminster, it's Chris Mason. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
And hello, North America editor Sarah Smith.
Hi there.
Have you warmed up since the inauguration, Sarah?
That was one very cold day. The weather has improved. The snow's still on the ground, but the thaw is coming.
Now, talking of warmth, that's quite a good word to describe this phone call that Donald Trump and Keir Starmer had over the weekend, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of conventional, really. It felt like conventional diplomacy, at least in terms of the publicly shared kind of sentiments from each side in what are known as the readouts. It's conventional when two leaders speak that each side will kind of churn out a few paragraphs about what was said on the call. And the two things have to sort of broadly match, so it looks like they're talking about the same conversation. But the emphases are always interesting and the language is always interesting. But for me, the story of the weekend was one of the BBC asking President Trump about Keir Starmer, on microphone on Air Force One, and the remarks being positive, and then the readouts from the calls being, pretty warm and pretty positive too. And I think certainly from Downing Street's perspective, I mean, this is not the greatest political insight I'm ever going to offer, but that's better than the alternative. And, ahead of the likely trip that the Prime Minister will make to Washington, I suspect in the next 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks roughly, that's a kind of useful basis upon which to start. I think both sides are aware that there's significant differences of character, significant difference of political outlook, and there will be significant differences on particular policies, no doubt, to come. But as things stand, the exchanges are pretty warm, and as I say, pretty conventional, which is newsworthy given that the new or returning incumbent in the White House is anything but, usually.
Because, yes, Sarah, if Donald Trump doesn't like somebody, he says it.
Oh, yeah, he's pretty clear about it, and he would probably have tweeted or put on X his views about it already too. And, there's no reason to think it wasn't a warm call, although that's not a word that appeared in the readout I got at this end. So Chris is right, they're often broadly similar, but it's where the differences come that it's always worth looking at. So the one that the White House sent out said that they'd held a call where Trump had offered his condolences for the recent loss of the Prime Minister's brother, expressed his well wishes for the British royal family, which is the great Trump card, of course, that the UK holds. Donald Trump loves the royal family and being invited to royal palaces and things like that. So that is something that we've got to offer him. And then it said that the two leaders discussed the recent release of an Israeli-British hostage and also how both countries can promote a fair bilateral economic relationship. I think the word fair is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But warm wasn't something that came into it. Although he did say very encouraging things when he was asked by the BBC on Air Force One about Keir Starmer, saying that he doesn't always agree with him, but that he has a very good relationship with him and that they'd enjoyed meeting each other a couple of times, that they'd had dinner before.
I was chatting, Adam, to someone high up in government at this end when I was asking for a bit of interpretation, a bit of extra detail on top of what a Downing Street spokesman had said and sent out to journalists. And I'm just looking at my notes now, and you'll notice a recurring word. Very warm, very good, very personal, very positive, very encouraging.
Very, very.
So exactly. But they also acknowledged it was lots of talk about working together rather than policy detail. In other words, agreeing not to talk about the stuff that they know they disagree about, so that therefore you create a conversation where it is warm and it is pretty agreeable because you've not talked about the stuff where there will be disagreements.
And Sarah, we've got a convenient list from Pippa Crerar, the political editor at The Guardian, who posted on social media all the things that it sounds like they didn't talk about where there might be disagreement, starting off with the identity of the UK's new ambassador to Washington, Lord Mandelson.
Well, so there's a little bit of controversy around this because there was a story appeared in the British press saying that there's a possibility that Donald Trump will refuse Peter Mandelson's credentials when he arrives as the new UK ambassador. So that's a formal thing that you do when a new ambassador arrives. You have to present a letter or something to the administration and they sign off that, they will now speak to you as the UK's representative. I haven't been able to find out at this end whether there's any truth to that. It came from somebody in the Trump camp, but whether that was somebody just expressing their own musing or whether it really came from the top has been very, very difficult to bottom out. We haven't seen Peter Mandelson here yet. I thought it was kind of notable that he didn't come for the inauguration celebrations when there were lots of parties being held around town that our current ambassador was very present at. That would have been maybe an opportunity for him to introduce himself to some people in the upper echelons of Trump world, or maybe it would have been seen that he was stepping on the current ambassador's toes if he did turn up at those things. But yeah, all the Brits are waiting with bated breath to see whether or not he really will be accepted as the ambassador when he turns up probably next month.
And then, Chris, one of the other things on Pippa Creera's list, and I maybe won't go through the whole list because this podcast will then be kind of Joe Rogan 3 hours long, but defense spending as a percentage of GDP, because Trump has talked about NATO countries spending 5% of GDP, which is actually more than even the US spends at the moment. But Labour are sort of sounding a bit lukewarm on even spending 2.5%.
Yeah, and so that's another potential, if not flashpoint, then point of disagreement. Equally, we know that a key part of the President Trump playbook is to start a negotiation with a big number, in the hope that you edge people who are miles away from that big number, vaguely as he would see it, in the right direction towards it, even if the likelihood of very many getting anywhere near it, including the states, is probably pretty limited. And I think actually on that particular issue, I think it's broadly speaking in sentiment terms where the White House is pushing against an acceptance from plenty of European capitals, not least here in London, that the argument that he made vociferously and bluntly in his first term around NATO, and frankly other members not pulling their weight as he saw it, that there's been an acceptance from others that he's right about that. And actually, in the passage of time since, as the world has arguably got considerably more dangerous still, the nature of that argument and how it is more compelling to more people, I think, is just more prominent. Now, that is separate, of course, from the specifics of at what point might the government here be willing to put a time commitment on its desire to get to 2.5% of national income spent on defence. Intriguingly, I was talking to one senior MP here earlier on who was asking an even bigger question, really, which is that the conversation in recent years has always been about that proportion of GDP. But if you're in an era of relatively low growth, at what point do you get to a conversation where it's actually about what your defence forces need, as opposed to a arbitrary percentage of an arbitrary number, which may or may not add up to what armed forces are deemed to need in what looks like a kind of dangerous generation ahead.
But Sarah, we've learned from Trump, the thing he tends to care about when it comes to defence spending is the number.
Absolutely. He does want to see a lot more money going in. He's made that very clear, not least because he points out that in terms of dealing with Russia and Ukraine, the biggest issue that NATO is facing at the moment, the US is geographically nowhere near it. He keeps going on that there's a little thing called an ocean between the US and Europe, and the US and Russia. And so he thinks that definitely it's European countries and those closest to Ukraine and the Russian border who should be picking up their spending on that massively. And it's going to be very interesting to see how a lot of those countries, and very much the UK included, deal with it when he turns his attention to Ukraine. And what seems to be, we don't know when he'll do it, but it seems pretty clear what he wants to do is create a ceasefire and freeze things where they are at the moment, and then start negotiations, which will almost certainly include Ukraine having to give up some territory. And if European allies of Ukraine and the UK don't agree with that, Trump's going to be very clear about who can pick up the bill to continuing to support Ukraine's defence. And I think that's going to be one of the bigger international diplomatic issues that the US and the UK are going to have to face off on. I think. What do you think, Chris?
I think absolutely. It is going to be a really interesting conversation, that, isn't it? Not least because, when I speak to folk here, and I think this will then play into some of the other issues that we're likely to hear from the White House. The UK political debate right now is obsessed about the generation of economic growth and creating the conditions where the economy has the greatest chance of growing, and we're going to hear from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves in a big speech on Wednesday. And in that context, when you throw into the mix, for instance, the threat of tariffs, import taxes being thrown around by the new president, a big part of the argument you're going to hear, not just from the UK but from others in his direction, is one where if other ideas coming from the White House could restrict economic growth, this is where the whole percentages thing breaks down a little bit, then you end up with economies that are smaller, that are then allocating, because of that percentage, a smaller real amount to defence, even if they are hitting a particular percentage indicator. And where does that leave the combined forces of NATO? So yeah, I think it's going to be absolutely sort of central to that conversation. But you know what? That is one of the areas where this conversation would have been happening anyway, I think. Imagine an alternative scenario where it wasn't President Trump. Okay, you might not have someone bandying around 5%, etc., etc. But that broader argument you'd be hearing from NATO members around the need to spend more than has been spent for a generation on defence, I still think would be very live.
And Sarah, this weekend, you guys in the US, well, I mean, everyone, everywhere, because we all witnessed it, had a real-time example of Trump's use of tariffs, of import taxes, as a tool to get his way. And it was getting his way with the South American nation of Colombia.
Yeah, he certainly did. I'll run you through very briefly what happened, because as you know, the other thing that Donald Trump is very, very focused on, alongside economic tariffs, is immigration and trying to deport, well, ultimately millions, he says, of undocumented migrants who are living in the United States. And so there's been an effort in the last few days for customs officials to go and round up as many illegal immigrants as they can find and forcibly deport them, and actually using military aircraft to do it. And the staging of this is all part of the optics, or the theatricality of it. Donald Trump wants to be seen to be doing this, as well as actually...
On the first day of the Lunar New Year, a time when most of China is celebrating with family, Alibaba made a bold move. The tech giant released Qwen 2.5 Max, a new version of its artificial intelligence model, claiming it outperforms the highly acclaimed DeepSeek V3. This unusual timing highlights the intense pressure Chinese AI startup DeepSeek has placed on both domestic and international competitors with its meteoric rise over the past 3 weeks. Alibaba's cloud unit announced on WeChat that Qwen 2.5 Max surpasses leading AI models like OpenAI's GPT-4, DeepSeek V3, and Meta's Llama 3.1-405B. This comes after DeepSeek shocked the tech world with the release of its AI assistant, powered by the DeepSeek V3 model, and its R1 model, which sent ripples through Silicon Valley. DeepSeek's low development and usage costs have even prompted investors to question the massive spending plans of US AI giants. But DeepSeek's success hasn't gone unnoticed at home. Domestic competitors are scrambling to keep up. Just 2 days after DeepSeek R1's release, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, updated its flagship AI model, claiming it outperformed OpenAI's O1 in benchmark tests. This mirrors DeepSeek's own claims of rivaling OpenAI's performance. The competition traces back to DeepSeek V2, the predecessor of the V3 model, which sparked an AI price war in China last May. Priced at just yuan per million tokens, DeepSeek V2 forced Alibaba and other tech giants like Baidu and Tencent to slash their prices by up to 97%. Yet, DeepSeek's enigmatic founder, Liang Wenfeng, insists the startup isn't focused on price wars. In a rare interview, he emphasized that DeepSeek's ultimate goal is achieving AGI, artificial general intelligence, a system that surpasses humans in most economically valuable tasks. Unlike Alibaba and other tech giants with hundreds of thousands of employees, DeepSeek operates like a nimble research lab, staffed by young graduates and doctorate students from China's top universities. Liang believes that the future of AI lies in innovation and agility, qualities he argues are often stifled by the high costs and rigid structures of large tech companies. As the AI race heats up, one thing is clear: DeepSeek's rise is reshaping the landscape, challenging both domestic and global players to innovate faster, smarter, and more efficiently than ever before.
President Trump says the rapid rise of the Chinese artificial intelligence company DeepSeek is a wake-up call for the US tech industry. DeepSeek, which its owners say cost around just $6 million to develop, has become the most downloaded free app in the US. It appears to require less powerful computer chips than its American tech giant rivals. But Mr. Trump said he was confident that the US would remain dominant in the field. Our North America technology correspondent Lily Jamali has more.
From a virtual unknown to most downloaded app in Apple's US App Store, DeepSeek has become an overnight sensation. It's an AI chatbot similar to OpenAI's ChatGPT, which first catapulted AI into the mainstream. DeepSeek can offer quick and comprehensive answers to your questions, from who is King Charles to what should I make for dinner. Introduced last week, by Monday, it had caught fire in the U.S., sending shockwaves through global markets. DeepSeek's Chinese developers claim they trained its models for a fraction of the funds and computing power used by competitors.
DeepSeek really changes the game. It's not that it's better than any existing models, but it's cheaper. And it doesn't require as many H100s. And a lot of the U.S. foreign policy around AI has been about how many of these fancy chips other people get to use, and China figured out a workaround to that.
U.S. tech stocks sent into freefall. Shares of the AI chip designer NVIDIA, most notably, fell by as much as 17% on Monday.
But spend enough time on DeepSeek and you notice that it doesn't answer certain questions. When our team asked what happened at Tiananmen Square, the response we got was, "I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. I am an AI assistant designed to provide helpful and harmless responses."
From what we've observed, DeepSeek consistently steers clear of answering questions that might be deemed politically sensitive by China.
In the particular case of DeepSeek, they have a bias built in to say things that are consistent with what the Chinese party wants them to say. The deletion example, where it gave an answer and walked the answer back, shows you that something has been added on, bolted on, to try to make this thing conform to somebody's idea of what's politically acceptable.
China and the U.S. are embroiled in an AI race. Just last week, President Donald Trump announced Stargate, a joint venture involving a $500 billion investment by global tech giants in AI infrastructure.
The release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser-focused on competing to win.
The UK government says Britain's £14 billion AI infrastructure investment also remains on track. With the arrival of DeepSeek, the AI race has just grown more heated. Lily Jamali, BBC News, San Francisco.
U.S. President Donald Trump has warned that a new AI chatbot from Chinese startup DeepSeek is a wake-up call for America's tech industry. The app has become the most downloaded free app in the U.S. already. Its popularity has shaken the markets, with U.S. chip giant NVIDIA seeing close to $600 billion wiped off its market value.
It's the breakthrough AI chatbot that's taken the tech industry by surprise. DeepSeek is a Chinese startup that says its artificial intelligence model rivals the competition at a fraction of the cost. Founded in 2023, DeepSeek says the app cost around $6 million to develop. That claim has sent off alarm bells for U.S. tech giants who spend billions on AI technology. DeepSeek spooked investors on Wall Street and sent stocks tumbling. NVIDIA, the company that makes chips to power AI, lost nearly $600 billion in value, the biggest one-day loss for a company in U.S. history. DeepSeek's rise comes on the heels of Donald Trump's announcement of a $500 billion project to build AI infrastructure. Trump issued this warning about the low-cost rival.
The release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser-focused on competing to win, because we have the greatest scientists in the world. Even Chinese leadership told me that.
DeepSeek is now #1 in Apple's App Store. It overtook ChatGPT, whose founder Sam Altman called DeepSeek an impressive model. The future of U.S. artificial intelligence is now in question, and the AI race could be anyone's game.
Daniel Winter from DW Business joins me now. Daniel, this kind of took everyone by surprise. How significant is DeepSeek's new chatbot, especially compared to other platforms like ChatGPT?
Okay, take everything that you know about AI and throw it out the window. They're rewriting the history books now as we speak because this model has changed everything, really. I mean, first of all, it proves that you can train a cutting-edge AI for the fraction of a cost of what the latest American models have been doing. That is already hugely significant. And secondly, it's also a demonstration of AIs learning from other AIs because that's how they're able to train DeepSeek up, is to learn from the other AIs that are out there. And it's so significant that one respected tech analyst who's not known for his hysteria, Ben Thompson, says it definitely seems like we are close to AGI. Now that's an AI model that can think and reason like a human being, because once you get AIs learning from AIs, they can improve on themselves and each other, and basically you've got what they call liftoff in the AI industry. And it's not that this is happening in this model, but it's the early signs that we're heading towards this era which AI scientists have been predicting for a while.
Now, what is DeepSeek's secret? You talked about the costs. How were they able to get there without spending billions of dollars?
Well, first of all, they cannot get their hands on the latest chips that are made in America by the likes of NVIDIA, right? Because there's a ban in place. So they've managed to be able to use chips which are just a little bit older, a little less powerful, still very powerful, but not as powerful as the latest ones, in order to make a model which rivals those that are in the United States right now. And that is the kind of the wow moment that's come out of this. How have they managed to get so far by using less computing power? So that is kind of the revolution that's going on here. That's what's behind why people are so shocked at the moment.
Shock, especially in the tech industry, because competitors now have some homework to do.
Absolutely.
What does this mean for the competition in the US and in the EU as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, think about poor NVIDIA, right? I mean, not so poor NVIDIA, but anyway, they rocketed up because of their AI chips that were doing fantastically. And then suddenly, they're in the position where their most optimistic projections are now not going to come true, because turns out that you don't necessarily need a lot of the most expensive chips that they can make right at the cutting edge, and that you can actually do it a bit cheaper. And that's why people are revising down their estimates for NVIDIA at the moment. When it comes to tech companies in the US and Europe, first of all, they're going to have to change their entire position on this. Do they make their own sources, their own models open source now? Perhaps that could be a way to, in order to have that scientific exchange speed up in the United States. As for Europe, Europe's been way behind for ages now. But if China can do it on less cost with less of the tech backing it, the physical infrastructure, is this a chance for Europe to now develop its model, or to be able to develop its own apps and software that build on its own AI that is made at a fraction of the cost? There is potential there. That could be a light at the end of the tunnel for Europe's AI dreams, which have so far been very far behind.
Yeah. With technologies like this coming from China, potential users like myself have questions about how's my data going to be handled, what's the bias this chatbot might have. What do we know about that at this point in time?
Okay, so we have to separate out the app from the model. So the DeepSeek app, if you download the app or if you go to their website, you will absolutely 100% get censored information. So you cannot ask about Tiananmen Square or massacres or any kind of negative aspect of Xi Jinping or anything to do with Chinese history in that regard. But the model itself, you can download that. I've downloaded it myself, a distilled version of the model, so it's smaller, can fit onto a computer, and then you can ask it anything, and it's completely uncensored. So you could imagine, because this is open source, that companies all over the world might say, well, I'll take that and I'll use it and I'll build on it and I'll be able to make something which is not censored. But then, of course, if the average user, consumers who are not going to go through that whole process, are attracted by the likes of the DeepSeek app and website, then they are going to get a very filtered version of the information that they might actually be looking for. And that is something that people need to be aware of.
DW Businesses, Daniel Winter, thank you so much. For more, I can talk to Stephanie here now. She's a tech researcher and AI expert. Stephanie, welcome to DW. Now, is the craze about DeepSeek's new chatbot justified?
Yeah, I think it is justified. It's a very useful prompt for American tech companies and indeed tech investors to take a long, cold look in the mirror to see if they are putting their money correctly into the right investments. So why am I saying that? Until really about a week ago, most people would have said that AI was a field that was dominated by the United States as a country and by very big American technology companies as a sector. We can now safely say that both of those assumptions are being challenged. Why? China has been number 2 in the world on artificial intelligence for a while, and I think still would be considered to be in that place. But the revelation of this new company and app, both called DeepSeek, the app is named the same as its company, coming from China, is really ranked, frankly, as good as some of the big American companies' apps are. So if you're using OpenAI's ChatGPT, it's going to be very similar to that. Now, it has some bugs, by the way, and some things that are still being worked out, but that's the same with all of the American apps too. So we just want to manage expectations. Nothing's perfect yet, but already the quality is very, very good. What has shocked the United States and the American tech sector is that they were able to build this app for a fraction of what American companies build it.
How so? What's their secret?
Well, a number of things are their secret. So first of all, they are using fewer chips than American companies because they've had to, because of the export controls put in by the US government to try and slow Chinese AI innovation down. It's actually almost had the opposite effect. That design constraint meant that they had to innovate and find a way to make their models work more efficiently. You have, necessity is the mother of invention. They have fewer chips, they had to find a way to make it work better. So that's point 1. Point 2 is that they've also built their technology using open source technology, whereas most of the US companies, with the exception of Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, have been using closed source technology. Now, what does that mean for people who aren't particularly technical? It just means that the Chinese DeepSeek app can be used by other people. They have opened up their code. Developers can take a look in, experiment with it, and build on top of it. And that is really what you want in the long-term race for AI. You want your tools and your standards to become the global standards. The real race between China and the United States with regards to artificial intelligence is about who is going to dominate in building out the entire infrastructure for AI.
Yeah, and it sounds like that race has been upended by how you're describing it. What impact is this going to have on the AI industry as a whole?
I think it's a healthy thing. I think the United States was possibly a little bit complacent with the lock-in of the Magnificent Seven, the so-called 7 top companies working on AI, who had unconstrained access to the chips that are powering this revolution and obscene amounts of money, as we saw from the US revelation of President Donald Trump last week for the Stargate $500 billion investment infrastructure program for AI. So for them, they didn't have to focus on being efficient in their models because they were just going constantly to be bigger. So I think it's good long term.
All right, that was tech researcher Stephanie Hare. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lisa Soda is a senior policy researcher at Interface. That's an independent expert organization specializing in IT and public policy, and her work focuses on all aspects of AI governance. Lisa, thanks so much for your time. Can I ask you, is the hype surrounding DeepSeek's new chatbot, is it justified?
Thanks so much for having me, first of all. Well, I think there's probably a bit more complicated picture whether or not it is justified or not. I think one thing that is really true, it is a very impressive model. It can really do a lot of impressive things and is on par basically with some of the best models that we're seeing in Western countries. But basically, just to give a little bit of a background, what the model does is it just doesn't kind of shoot back an answer, but kind of thinks through a problem step by step. And just like a human, we come up with a lot of better results by this approach. But I think what was really, really impressive, and is also the thing that kind of made investors sit up and panic, is the cost of development. And so there were some really impressive jumps and developments that we're seeing.
That's right. I mean, other companies are spooked, aren't they, by how DeepSeek has managed to develop this for a fraction of the money that others have had to invest. So, I mean, can you tell us their secret?
Yeah, just to give like a little bit of background. So it is estimated that the rare training was around $6 million US, which is compared to the $100 million that the companies right now are putting into these models, really just a tiny fraction. What we have to say is that a lot of the things that this DeepSeek model is building on is actually on things that the US has first developed. So a lot of the things were just kind of copying what has been made before. But then there's also a lot of things where they were able to distill the model and create more efficient approaches in the training, but also in the inference stage that makes it so much cheaper. And I think like one really impressive thing is that it's challenging a lot of assumptions that have been made in Silicon Valley about what it actually needs to create really impressive model.
So the question is, how is this going to impact the AI industry as a whole?
I think it's really unclear and difficult to tell the future of such an industry that's changing so fast and rapidly. But what we see for now, at least, is that the barrier of entry is much lower than it was expected in the past. So even though 6 million is still a really impressive sum, it would allow more players to basically enter the market. And a really interesting thing.
Can I just ask you, because I am aware of our time is limited, what are DeepSeek's political limits, given that it comes from China? So, for example, would it answer questions about Tiananmen Square or about Tibet, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think also very interestingly, and I think something that we don't talk a lot about, is also China has a lot of regulation and laws around how models have to be developed and deployed. And one law they passed, or measures they passed, is on how generative AI should be developed and what kind of output they can give out. And so in a lot of ways, it's actually much more stricter than the AI Act. So questions that might pose a threat to national security or the social order in China, they can't really answer these things. So as you pointed out, if you ask politically sensitive questions, you probably won't get the same answer you would get from a ChatGPT model.
Lisa Soda, AI governance researcher. Lisa, thank you so much for those really interesting insights. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And for more on this, we can speak to Min Jiang, a professor of communication studies at the University of North Carolina in the US. Welcome. Thanks so much for your time. We're going to look at the US reaction in just a moment. Can I ask you first what the release of a robust Chinese AI model tells us about how advanced the Chinese tech sector is?
Well, apparently advanced enough that it's causing the world to reassess their previous basic assumptions about AI. For example, is ChatGPT Pro worth $200 a month? On a very practical level, now there's a free open source version. And how overvalued is OpenAI, or for that matter, any other US AI companies? Is the $500 billion Stargate project announced by Donald Trump last week, for example, the correct strategy? So it raises definitely a lot of questions. Based on the technological reports assessing DeepSeek and another Chinese open source AI, Kimi, their abilities to compute looks like they seem to be performing on par or slightly ahead in some areas compared to OpenAI's model that powers ChatGPT, as well as Google's Gemini and Meta's Llama, for example. What fascinates the technological community seems to be DeepSeek's sophisticated reasoning chains that demonstrate how AI arrives at its conclusion on a given question. So these models also appear to be more efficiently running, requiring much computing power. There's a lot of dispute we have just heard over DeepSeek's alleged development price tag of $6 million and the possibility that it may have access to the most advanced NVIDIA chips under embargo. These facts, I'm sure, will be litigated in the days and months to come, but based on the models themselves, the Chinese open source model seems to be reflecting legitimate efficiency, innovation, and really different approaches to solving some of the difficult problems in AI development. Even, OpenAI's Sam Altman and NVIDIA and President Trump himself have acknowledged that the US AI firms now have good competition.
How important is technology like this for Beijing's technology strategy? So there's the idea of China not having to rely on Western technology.
AI is definitely an important piece of Beijing's overall technology development strategy. In many of the advanced technology areas, China is quickly catching up and even pulling ahead in some areas. For instance, in 5G area, China has Huawei. In leading social media apps, China has TikTok, which is now getting banned. And RedNote, for example, recently becoming really, really popular. In EVs, China has BYD and NIO. China is also developing a very impressive nuclear fusion program. So in AI, we now know that China has DeepSeek and Kimi. I think it's important to remember that China has long believed in technological self-efficiency and independence. This belief has deep roots from the Cold War era, during which China developed its nuclear capabilities. In the opening and reform era, since the late 1970s, China has this strategy and mantra called for modernization, referring to modernization in agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. So the country has been practicing technological self-sufficiency for quite some time, for decades, and we shouldn't be too surprised. What is surprising, as your video already alluded to, is China's effort in open source. The fact that both DeepSeek and Kimi are open source AI models. So this strategy is definitely challenging the more proprietary model that we have seen from the United States. So the US is building up its walls around itself. China seems to be tearing them down. So this is actually something quite interesting that we can, the world really is yet to see how it develops and unfold over time.
I'm aware of our time limit, so just very quickly, looking at the US, Trump sees DeepSeek as a wake-up call for US industry. Do you see any danger of protectionist reactions? Just in 30 seconds, if you could.
Well, one thing is clear is that US sanctions may have backfired, accelerating China's innovation instead. In the short term, sanctions may cause difficulties, but I think in the long term, sanctions, as we have seen, don't quite work that well. President Trump really has a pledge to win and compete. Personally, I don't think a zero-sum, I win, you lose Cold War mentality is really productive. Competition in the AI area is a global phenomenon. And we have seen throughout history that breakthroughs often come from very unexpected places. So rather than framing this as an us and versus them kind of game, I think the world has much to benefit from learning from others and solving some of the difficult problems that we face collectively.
Min Jiang, we've run out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for your time today, Professor of Communication Studies at the University of North Carolina.
Thank you.
Achieving it. So there was a military aircraft with migrants on it who had been handcuffed and treated fairly uncomfortably, was trying to land in Colombia to return Colombian natives. And the Colombian government were angry enough about this, about the manner in which they were being treated, that they refused the aircraft the right to land. And that created a bit of a diplomatic spat. Donald Trump was very angry, and he said that if this was the case, he was going to impose 25% tariffs or income taxes on all the goods coming from Colombia into the United States. That's a lot of coffee, and it's a lot of fresh flowers as well, actually. It would really hurt the Colombian economy if he was to do that. And they were also talking about refusing visas and credentials for various Colombian officials, all sorts of diplomatic tools. And actually, Donald Trump ended up getting his way really quite quickly, because all he has to do is post this threat on social media, and before you know it, there are lots and lots of very urgent conversations going on. Whether the Colombians got any concessions or not, we don't know yet, but what we do know is that they have agreed that these military flights from the US can now land. So without having to actually impose any of these tariffs, Donald Trump used his bully pulpit and his America First policy to get exactly what he wanted, it would appear, from the Colombians.
My two observations from the weekend, which are probably less good quality than you two's observations, because you're closer to these things than I am. Number one, on tariffs. So Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, when she was on Laura's show on Sunday, was saying, she didn't say these exact words, but she was sort of suggesting that the UK can relax a bit when it comes to the threat of tariffs, because actually, in quite a few years, the US has had a trade surplus with the UK. In other words, the US has sold more to the UK than the UK has sold to the US. And quite often, Trump is talking about tariffs as a way of balancing trade deficits, where other countries sell more to the US than the US sells to them. So meaning that maybe the UK wouldn't be quite in the same position as some other countries. But what the Colombia example shows is that was to get an objective. That was as part of a negotiation. It wasn't to redress a perceived trade imbalance that Trump saw between the two countries. So maybe the UK isn't as potentially as exempt as Rachel Reeves might like us to think from that interview with Laura. And the second thing is, I watched over and over a clip of Trump having a town hall meeting in Los Angeles with the Democrat mayor of Los Angeles, and she's had quite a lot of criticism on social media for her handling of the fires. And it was also with a group of homeowners at this meeting who had lost their homes and were waiting to get access to their properties to demolish them and start rebuilding. And Trump was just there. He was more like Robert Kilroy Silk from those old chat shows, those old audience shows, where he was like sort of moderating between the angry people in the audience and the mayor of LA. And he was just like chatting away, and he was very chilled, and he was arguing with people and bringing people in and arguing with her, and it was just so relaxed, and he was just very, very loose. And I just think now that he, with his re-election, has been re-elected in a sort of with more legitimacy than they had the first time round, that will put a lot of pressure, I think, on politicians in other countries to be looser and to put themselves kind of in harm's way a bit more with members of the public and their opponents, because Trump just does it so naturally. He's setting a new baseline for what political communication is.
Totally. I was talking to a cabinet minister earlier on today who was saying exactly that they'd watched on telly the other day when the president was signing all of those executive orders and making theatre out of it, political theatre, and throwing pens to supporters and all that kind of thing. And this person was saying that was theatrical delivery in action. You know, you've voted for X, and here's me starting to deliver X. Now, maybe you can do a bit more of that in a presidential system than you can in a parliamentary democracy. But my goodness, this person was saying that is a lesson you've got to take away. When we're so used to, being able to, order the delivery to our door in next to no notice. In other words, that sort of age of instant gratification and the politicisation of that via his mechanism of communication is really, really powerful. It might not be to everyone's taste, but it's really, really powerful.
Chris, that's absolutely fascinating that people in the UK are talking about it. Could you imagine 4 or 8 years ago any politicians from anywhere in the political spectrum saying we need to be emulating Donald Trump more? I mean, it's practically unthinkable. And he is a master of this, of creating these moments of political spectacle, of capturing everybody's attention. And also, when it comes to what he was doing in the past week, very performatively doing things that his supporters want him to, that are maybe not the most significant things that his administration could possibly get around to, but demonstrate some level of delivery. And whilst maybe it's going to be harder to, for instance, tackle inflation, get prices down, some of the big things that he's promised, but if he's with a great flourish signing an order to release all of the January the 6th rioters, then that grabs everybody's attention whilst he's doing it. I think a lot of other politicians in other countries would struggle to do it with his level of panache and would just end up looking rather gauche and embarrassed as a result. But that they're even talking about wanting to try and emulate him, is just, that shows you how much he's rewriting the rules globally, doesn't it?
Now, the stock market values of lots of big American tech companies plunged on Monday, and the reason they plunged was the news that there is a new artificial intelligence model on the block, and it comes from China, and it can pretty much do the same things that OpenAI and Microsoft and Google's and Meta's models can do, but much, much more cheaply, because it uses much less powerful and many fewer computer chips. And this raises big questions about what road AI is going to go down. Will it go down a much cheaper, much more available route, which we hadn't expected it to, or will it stick on the road it was on, which was big American tech companies delivering it with very, very expensive tech? This is absolutely fascinating. It feels to me like we've reached a very 21st century fork in the road. So let's speculate about what's going on and what has led us to this fork in the road. I'm joined here in the studio by two of the finest human minds in the BBC. It's our AI correspondent, Mark Chislak. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
And Faisal Islam is here. Hello, Faisal.
Hello.
I see you've come dressed as a tech bro from Davos.
Yes, no,
You've got your,
I have.
You've got your gilet under
Well, no,
your jacket.
from a jacket. Maybe if I took the jacket off. I'm a bit confused.
You're not up a mountain anymore.
I should ask an AI to tell me how to dress.
We'll come on to that later.
It would say like this. It would say a gilet is absolutely the uniform that you need.
Well, they do say that AI gets it wrong a lot. Anyway, and Mark, you've also come dressed as you've come as Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
With your
either
polo neck.
that or a 60s cat burglar.
Yeah. Anyway, right, let's do the news. Our fashion podcast is short-lived, thankfully. Mark, what is DeepSeek?
So, DeepSeek, a Chinese AI company that's come up with a large language model, if you like. It's the sort of thing that we see from ChatGPT. It's caused a huge fuss over the weekend because it stormed to the top of Apple's free app downloads in the App Store charts, unseating ChatGPT. It's made the markets get a little bit jittery, which I'm sure you'll talk to us about. And the reason it's made the markets get a bit jittery is supposedly it's cost a really small amount of money in comparison to other AI models to train and to develop. It's apparently cost $6 million to develop. Now, to give you some sort of sense around what that means, some of OpenAI's models have apparently cost in excess of $100 million to develop. So this has resulted in the value of quite a few tech companies taking quite a big hit on the markets today because there's thinking perhaps that we're in a bit of an AI bubble, that these companies are overvalued, that the investment that we're seeing in them isn't really, it's not representative of the value that we're going to see back from them in the short term.
Yeah, so lots to talk about there, but Faisal, just to expand on the market reaction, is this basically lots of traders going, oh, hang on, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, you guys were about to spend billions and billions and billions. Maybe you don't need to spend. Is that what it comes down to?
At the very least, raises very serious questions about an assumption about the way the world was going to work, which was these models would be essential for every corner of the economy, society, the government. Therefore, amazing amounts of compute power would be required. Therefore, amazing amount of very advanced chips would be required. All of the companies in that supply chain saw their share prices go up and up and up and up and up.
Particularly one called NVIDIA.
Well, NVIDIA it used to specialize in gaming chips, and it turned out that was best. A huge application for that was in AI, and their share price at one point very recent in last hour was down 17%. It's lost nearly a fifth of its value. I think it's lost more than the value of Exxon, the oil company. So this is quite a serious re-evaluation potentially. In any event, people thought that some of these tech companies were a little bit bubbly, that they couldn't really sustain these values, and some sort of pin-pricking moment we were waiting for. I think this may be more than that, though, because actually I think what it says is, just go back a week ago when you think about that picture of the tech bros next to the president and then them announcing $500 billion for Stargate, this big project for AI, and it just looked like American tech supremacy was set for decades.
But it was actually for 4 days.
Well, and then suddenly you have this, and in fact, you said I'd just come back from Davos. It was actually the end of the World Economic Forum where people just started literally running around. Have you heard about this DeepSeek thing? And it raises questions, and it's not just a one-off. Various bits of investment have gone into China, and there's a fundamental question here, which is we assume that the Western companies, and Silicon Valley in particular, is just the best for this sort of stuff. But in AI, what matters isn't just the quality of the innovation. By the way, China's got thousands and thousands of PhDs, but it's also the quality of the data. And it turns out that countries like China, for various reasons, have got a lot of it. Have got a lot of data going into a lot more, with less qualms about privacy, perhaps, than the West. So could that be a route to better AI models? Perhaps not in this case, but it just raises all sorts of questions about our assumptions, not just about tech, not just about the economy, but also about power in the world.
Right. So let's do a comparison then between this new kid on the block and the ones that we know a bit better, like ChatGPT. Have you tried them both out, both of you?
Yes, in certain circumstances, you could say that ChatGPT has got a little bit of a lead on DeepSeek. DeepSeek is apparently, and I've tried some of the maths applications and things, or tried to ask it some questions about maths and sciences and those kind of things, and apparently it scores better than OpenAI's apps will, or OpenAI's models will.
Right.
But when you start asking it questions about world events, when you start asking it questions about things that the Chinese government might be uncomfortable with, that's where DeepSeek starts to fall down.
Oh, so if you ask it a question about the massacre in Tiananmen Square,
it won't give you an answer. It'll try and change the subject as well quite quickly.
Right.
Tries to change the subject, says it doesn't know about those sort of things. Tiananmen Square, the treatment of Uyghurs, Taiwan, a whole raft of questions that the Chinese government might be uncomfortable with, it will not respond to.
And are there the same security questions around it that there are around TikTok?
Well, if the Americans are going to ban TikTok, then you'd imagine they'd have more than an arched eyebrow about where this could go. I didn't try it myself. I outsourced this out for some. I'm obviously to my kids, just to compare side by side, and of course they're not using it to search geopolitical events of any description. Yeah. It's like it was a rather cute question. Also, it was just, how did whales get in the sea? And please, can you teach me algebra? And certainly on the second one, again, I can't, for an 11-year-old child, reports to me that
this is not industry standard benchmarking.
No,
yeah,
this
we need to do a lot more testing.
But there was a way in which it explained things and reasoned and went through the sequence of trying to explain something complicated that they preferred to what they saw from ChatGPT. Now, these are all moving targets, these models. They're all getting better and better and better. But the key thing is that I think whatever you argue, it's kind of up there, right? But I think the key thing is it's so much cheaper in terms of the cost of using it and of deploying it. If you believe what their claims.
That was going to be my next question, because I'm not an expert in this, but very quickly today I started seeing all these people raising questions about whether it was as cheap as they're claiming. Is it as cheap as they're claiming, or why are there so many questions about it?
Yeah, we don't know. $6 million sounds. A lot of industry experts have said that sounds like it's a made-up number, or at the very least it's a very massaged number, because the numbers that we've seen so far, and even when we talk to some of the most innovative AI developers in the world, how quickly and cheaply they might be able to produce something, they've not said they'd ever be able to produce a model at a cost like that. So there are some big question marks over those sorts of numbers. But we can't forget that they've open sourced this. That means that they've just thrown it out there.
Oh yeah, just explain a bit more about that.
So that means it's publicly available.
People can copy and paste all the code behind it.
Yes, yeah. You could use it. You can plug this into your own software if you want to, which is something that OpenAI hasn't done. Theirs is behind a wall. You can't do that. You can pay them to get access to it, and in some respects you'll have to pay a small amount of money, or a smaller amount of money, to license this DeepSeek technology to do the same thing with your own software here. But the amount of money that they're asking in comparison to OpenAI is pennies.
And I think this is why Mark Andreessen, who's a really kind of noted Silicon Valley investor who's very close to the new administration, has called it a Sputnik moment. So that's obviously a reference to, to the Soviet Union
launching their first satellite.
I thought it's partially right.
Yeah.
Because the Soviet Union got the first satellite into space. They got the first human into space. First dog into space. They did in the space race. The Soviet Unions did all of the big firsts, and it was really, on NASA's shoulders to get a big win in there.
Yeah.
NASA only really managed to get a man on the moon first. That was their big thing.
Yeah.
So the Soviet Union was the sort of the preeminent power in the space race until the moon landed.
No.
The difference is now that the United States is currently
got the
global AI. So they've got the dog. They've got the dog floating around space.
But my only point about this is that clearly Mark knows more than me about the tech stuff here, but these people are taking it seriously. They're taking it seriously as a moment of competition. They're taking it seriously that China has enough to compete and has enough to potentially collapse the cost of this. Now, others are saying, well, if they collapse the cost of running, of making effective these chips, that shouldn't necessarily be bad for all of these companies whose shares, and it isn't just Nvidia, by the way, there's just a whole sweep of shares. It's affecting the price of US government bonds right now. I wouldn't call it a stock market crash, but like it's a serious move in the stock market at a time when the president is obsessed with the value of the US stock market. So let's see what he says about this, which he said nothing so far. But I think it's a big moment. It's what you call a black swan. We should have expected this. It was always US versus China. How they respond, and you mentioned TikTok, how they respond given that they've banned TikTok to this, how we respond. What's the cybersecurity command going to say about whether this sort of stuff should be downloaded, about us chucking data into that? I'm sure if it's school kids asking how it's to teach algebra, maybe that's okay.
Low risk.
But it's amazing to think that it's the number one on the apps.
Yeah, I'm always interested in what the tipping point is, because it sounds like from listening to you two, it was there for people to find.
Yeah, it's been there since the beginning of the year.
Exactly. So what is it about the last 3 or 4 days that means it's now become a global talking point? What happened?
People have noticed it, and people have
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and the idea of it being open source, has made huge ripples. And I think, as far as I was saying, the trajectory, everybody assumed the economic trajectory of pretty much most of the Western democracies was now deeply entwined with AI. Our government just a couple of weeks ago was talking about how it was betting big on AI. The Americans have been talking about their big bets on AI. So it looked like things were going in one direction, and this has properly thrown a cat amongst the pigeons by saying, oh, hey, okay, here's a totally different way of thinking about this. But it's also, there's an inspirational thing to take from this as well, that for countries that aren't already the dominant AI superpower and have all of this investment and have the ability to grab hold of this, tens of billions of dollars worth of investment, it's inspirational for them, because it means that you can start thinking in more innovative ways. You can start what is it? What's that say? What's that phrase?
You need to give us a clue.
I've forgotten it.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
That's it. Necessity has become the mother of invention. Not being able to get hold of investment, or perhaps not being able to get hold of the technology, has led to this happening.
One of the reasons this firm in China had to go down the route of using less powerful chips was because the more powerful chips weren't available because of US controls on the market.
Yeah, this is a critical part of the story. Okay, so we take a step. This is not even a tech firm in China. China's got brilliant tech firms. Some of them are embargoed by the West. This was a hedge fund.
And he was doing it in his free time.
And this was a side project. Having used AI to bet on the markets, they then they used this to develop a large language model. Now, a lot of this was built, Mark mentioned open source, was built on some of the open source developments in America, and they're getting better and better and better. But it is extraordinary to think that this was a side project. One of the things I was shown at the World Economic Forum last week was when these things get totally intuitive and you can just chat to them like they were there on the chair. And I was demonstrating something like this from Google Astra, and I was totally blown away, because I was a bit skeptical about this. You do quite naturally start to trust it far more than you could ever imagine trusting a search.
Right.
And then you wonder, and I don't know what the answer to this question is.
There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in a lot of those demonstrations.
It's just talking about the psychological.
Yeah,
I'm saying, okay, but we can envisage a situation where the quality of the output of something like ChatGPT gets so good that it becomes conversational. That's within the next 3 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay? So when that happens, your ability, the amount of information you will then give to that thing, like, it's very difficult to restrict it. And imagine that, you let your younger relatives.
People are having relationships with chatbots.
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to go there.
People are already doing that.
We don't need to even go there.
People are already doing that.
Then, of course, there's the job implications of you never need to hire another call center worker ever again.
No, but I'm thinking about the business model, Adam. I'm thinking like how in the past we started off searching and it was pure maths and algorithm, what's the most relevant, and then the advertisers sort of got in and it was slightly changed what came the top of the rank. Now, if that AI that you can actually converse with, which is like close, I would say, if that happens, and in fact its answers are being biased by who's paying the most,
But we're very good. We're very good as a species at spotting something that is inauthentic.
Yeah, but
we are very good. We are very good at starting to switch off when something gets inauthentic, and when it becomes almost obvious that they're selling to us or that we're being directed towards a place.
I look forward to you two disagreeing about this multiple times for the next few years. But just one last note for you, Faisal. I mean, if you think back to the government's AI strategy 2 weeks ago, and then Rachel Reeves has got this big growth speech on Wednesday, like this is a government that moves at kind of like 20th century pace, and actually the technology and the world and the markets are moving at 22nd century pace already. How do those two things coexist?
I noticed a significant uptick in the pace at Davos last week, which was being done with the world, trying to impress the world's investors. And some of the ideas they had was suddenly, they were coming from a different stream.
Like ministers, you mean?
For ministers, yeah, and some of their advisors as well. So, for example, they've quite quickly moved towards this position on trying to wave through people on visas in the AI industry and in pharmaceuticals. One way of reading that, you don't hear the government say this, but certainly from the pharmaceutical industry, for example, is, oh, look, something might be happening in America where pharmaceutical industry might not be quite the flavour of the month, shall we say.
So there might be an exodus.
Well, there may or may not be, or maybe there'll be a marginal one, or maybe people think, maybe I've got to look somewhere else. Make sure you're ready to kind of sort of wave that human capital that's vital for growth in as quickly as you can. So you're starting to see slightly more nimble, speedboat-like behaviour as regards trying to grab that growth. Were they ready for this in real time? Evidently not. Few people were. We've seen from the reaction in the stock market. They're going to have to get a response really quickly. And this is an extraordinary dilemma. I don't know what the answer will be. Do you say, like I suspect the Americans will get to, although Silicon Valley seems okay with it, do you stop this? Do you shut this down? Do you ban it, like TikTok? Or does Britain say, do you know, this is actually transformative for the world? We need to sort of have a slightly middle ground. Don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, we should say on the TikTok ban in America, it's got quite confused, hasn't it? So Congress passed a law that the courts kind of gave a thumbs up to, but then Trump came in and said, I'm going to give myself a couple of months to decide whether to implement this or not. Brackets, I'm not going to implement it because I love TikTok.
No, you're absolutely right, yeah.
So it's a bit more confusing than that. Anyway, Faisal, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks to you too.
Thank you.